LeetCode 242, valid anagram, quite a simple and easy problem, but essentially you're given two strings, s and t. You return true if t is an anagram of s, and false if otherwise. So if you don't know what an anagram is, it's a word or phrase formed by rearranging the letters of a different word or phrase, typically using all the original letters exactly once. So I'll just give you a very simple example. So let's say you have s, and that's equal to a, b, c. You have t, and that could be equal to c, b, a. S is an anagram of t, t is an anagram of s, because it has all the same letters and all the same amount of letters as well. And you keep in mind, for this problem, one of the stipulations is that the letters will all be lowercase, so you don't have to worry about case sensitivity or anything like that. So as you can see, there's one A here, one A here, there's one B here, one B here, one C here, one C here, so this checks out. So how would we figure this out in code? Well, there's actually quite a simple way to do it. The way I like to do it, and the way that makes more sense for me, is you can do a new int array. You can call it charCount. I'll just put char c, and that will be size 26, right? So there's 26 spots in charCount. 0, 1. So it'll go from index 0 all the way to index 25. So that means there's a total of 25 spots to place integers in this array, right? And the way I like to do it is I like to have 0, the index 0 represent A, the index 1 represent B, the index 2 represent C, etc., 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 until you reach the end of the alphabet, essentially. So I would loop through and I would say, okay, we have one A and S, so let's increment index 0, right? Because we know we have one A there, so we want to represent one A. And then we can check T, check the first char, and we see it's C. And then instead of incrementing for the T, we can actually decrement. This way, we know that if we increment all the letters here in S, and we decrement all the letters here in T, we know eventually it will balance out to 0 if they're an anagram. Because if there's one A, you increment here, one A, you decrement here, it'll be 0 in the A slot by the end. So then, you keep doing this, so you have A, 1, C. C is the third letter of the alphabet, so it'll be in the second index in charCount. So in the second index in charCount, I'll put -1. Then we continue the loop. We check B. B is the second letter of the alphabet, so it'll be in index 1, which is the second slot in charCounts. So we're going to increment. And then within that same loop, we also check this, the second letter in T as well. So we see B. Okay, and remember, for T, we're decrementing. So in index 1, we want to decrement. So this will now, index 1 will go back to 1. Will go back to 0 rather, because it was 1. Then finally, another loop iteration hits. We check C. Okay, C, we know that represents index 2 because it's the third letter of the alphabet. So for S, we're incrementing. So -1 goes back to 0. We have 0 now. Then finally, in that same iteration of the loop, we have A. We know we're decrementing for T, so we go to the first element, which represents A, and we decrement. And now, in charCount, we have all zeros. That means, yes, this is an anagram because it balanced out in the end. It balanced out, that means there's the exact same amount of letters and the exact same letters. So we can just loop through charCounts, from 0 to 25, so 26 times, and check, does every single element in charCounts equal 0? If that's true, we return true. But if it's false, obviously it's not an anagram, and we would return false. So I'll show you how to do it in code. So in the code, the very first thing you want to check, it's just a simple edge case. It's if you're given two strings of different lengths, it doesn't work. It just doesn't make sense. You can't have an anagram if one string is longer than the other. So the first thing you can check is if s.length is not equal to t.length, you return false. And that's a very simple edge case, and you can just, before you start coding, you can just think of, you know, any simple edge cases that jump out to you. So that'll be a good check. That's the very first thing you should be checking. So now, as I said, you want to make an int array, and I call it charCounts. So new int array, and you make it size 26 because there's 26 letters in the alphabet. So it'll go from 0 to 25. And then you want to loop through. This first loop will be looping through the length of a string, and you can choose the length of either one since we know they're equal. So for int I equals 0, I is less than s.length I plus plus. So then, as I said, remember, we're incrementing for a letter within s, and we're decrementing for a letter within t. Now, how do we know the correct index? How do we make it so that index 0 represents A, index 1 represents B, index 2 represents C, and so on? Well, we can simply subtract the current char we're looking at. So if we do s.char at I, so the current char we're looking at, so if we're looking at A, for example, because I is 0 right now, let's say we have A, and we subtract that from the char A. In ASCII, if you do char A minus char A, you're going to end up with 0. So this will actually represent your index, and it'll work no matter what this char is. So if this is char B, in ASCII, char B minus char A will equal 1, so that'll be the correct index for B. And it'll work for C, it'll work for any letter. You just simply subtract the char from A. So as you should remember, this is actually your index. So if you go to charCounts, we want to edit that index based on you know, incrementing or decrementing it. So if we have charCounts, and then we do then we put this in the index, we want to increment that. So all this code does is, if there's an A there, it's going to go to charCounts at 0, and it's going to add 1. And then remember, we have to do the same, pretty much the same thing for T, but we're decrementing because we want it to balance out. So instead of doing plus plus at the end, we do minus minus, and we're decrementing. So once this code runs, if it's an anagram, by the end, all values within charCounts 0 to 25 will be 0. So how do we check that? Just simple, another for loop that goes from 0 to 25. So I is less than 26, I is 0, and then I plus plus. And then one line of code, if charCounts, copy paste it because I'm lazy, at I is not equal to 0, turn false. And then otherwise, if this never returns false, that means everything's 0, so you just return true. As simple as that, and then this code should work. Let's see the result. Okay, cool. And yeah, this is O of n time complexity,